Hello again, and welcome to this lecture on Adobe Illustrator from Eduonics Technologies. And in this lecture, we're going to be talking about the intent to print versus the intent for web, and how to basically set up your documents and work with multiple documents. So first, let's create a new document. So anyway, let's get into it. It starts out with a paper size, which is the basic. Its letter is 8.5 by 11, and it has it displayed in points. Typically for print, I like to use inches. I'm American, so that's why. Centimeters and millimeters are fine too. It all depends on really what I'm creating it for. I have it set to letter, which is 8.5 by 11, and you can see that now as it's in inches. Bleed is the amount of space you have that goes beyond the edge of the sheet before trimming. I would have to create some bleed. When you're working with print documents, you use bleed. When you're working with web and screen, it doesn't even matter. And generally, I like to set these things up afterwards, but you can do them right here too. So basically, bleed is the area that gets chopped off. I'm going to set the bleed to 0.25, which is a generous amount of bleed. As you can see over here, this is make all settings the same. I was going to say constrain settings, but it just means that when you enter in something right here, that it'll be the same in each of the corresponding boxes. You'll notice this icon on a lot of things. That's what it does. It constrains the values, essentially. So I'll explain more about the bleed when you see the document after we've clicked OK. The last three things here, since we did select print, although it says custom now since we've changed things. When you're designing for print, you want to use CMYK. That's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. The K stands for black. These are the colors that printers produce, and there's a corresponding range of colors that you'll be able to use in selecting this. These settings also make the way images appear in Illustrator resemble more closely how they're going to appear when they're printed. It also gives you warnings. If I were to use a color that can't be printed, it'll give me a little warning, and I'll show you that in a little bit after we set up this document. But basically, if you're designing for print, you want to use CMYK. There are other options, and we'll get into that with a new document when we talk about designing for web. Raster effects. This one can be changed later on since this is Adobe Illustrator, but in general you want to set this to 300 ppi, or pixels per inch, or points per inch. This is standard magazine resolution, standard print resolution, and printers can even print more than that, depending on how it's actually being done. But generally you want to keep this on high. You can also enter in medium if you want it to be a smaller file size. So for raster effects, for print, you usually want to keep that at high. This is 300 pixels per inch, points per inch, either way. If you want a smaller file size, you can choose medium, but we want to keep this at 300. And for the preview mode, I like to always keep mine as default. If you select pixel preview mode, and this is independent of web or print design, really, although one is good for print, one's good for web, but if you have it on pixel preview mode, which by the way you can also change when you're in the document, it'll show you what it actually looks like if it were printed at the sizes. So I'm going to turn that on just so you can see. And you know what, let's just select 2 artboards here so you can see what that does too. Or 3, even better. These are artboard settings, not really that important. We have 3 artboards. Change the layout that way. Anyway, let's click OK. So the red that you see is the bleed that we set up. That's 0.25 inches outside of the 8.5 by 11 artboards. It put it on every artboard we created. This would be if you wanted to create a 3-page document with color going all the way to the sides. Any shapes that I put inside the white area are going to be printed, although I can change this at any time. But since I said this is going to be a full bleed print document, let's create a quick background just so I can explain. And I'm going to turn on snapping. So what I did here, let's make this a color. Let's say my document that I'm creating is going to be red. I'm going to want to drag this all the way to the bleed, and maybe even a little bit past it. So that when it prints, because printers usually have margins that they can't print all the way to the edges, although there's some that can, typically they can't. When this prints, this is the area right here. It's going to get cut off. So if your cut is just a little bit to the left, and we didn't have it going outside of the artboards, for example, if it was back the original size we had it, and your cut was just a little bit off to the outside of the document, you would have white or some other color, whatever color your paper is, right there, and it wouldn't look right. So that's essentially what we set the bleeds up for. Now, as you can see up here, this will tell you what kind of preview mode you're in and what kind of color mode you're in. So remember, we're in CMYK, which is for print. And I'm going to show you an example of some colors that we can't use and how you know to identify them. So I'm going to draw a box here and go over into my color picker. Double click on that. And then pay attention to this area up here. Right now it's white. If I were to click right up here, this red can't be printed. The one on the top is for print colors, and the one on the bottom is for web colors. This red can't be printed, nor can it be displayed in the web. I know that seems kind of strange, but this one's not as important. We'll get into that with the web version of this anyway. Anyway, if I click this box right here, it'll make it the closest possible color that can be printed, which for some strange reason is an even brighter shade of red, but I don't have to worry about it anymore. If you notice down here also, it's displaying the CMYK values. When I have the previous out of gamut error, these values aren't correct. One of these, either yellow or magenta, is going outside of 100%, and that's why it's giving me that. So just remember, if you see this, you're not going to get that exact color, and you're going to want to click it to get the next best color. So that's a little bit more of an explanation of the difference between web and print in terms of color. So just a little bit more to know about printing is the resolution that you picked. I'm going to turn on the rulers here. As you can see, my document is 8.5 inches wide like we set it up. And I know that I can print out 300 pixels per inch. I have to keep that in mind when I'm making things. That's very generous for this document size. However, if I was using a smaller document size, or if I wanted to have some one-point text in here, let's make that horizontal text. If I wanted to have some incredibly small text, say 1 point, I'm just going to type out some gibberish. So you can see it's very small. This is like a standard sheet of paper, letter size paper, if you're in America, I guess. Kind of close to A4 if you're in England. Now, like I said, the settings can be changed outside of the new document window, but you want to set it up as early as possible. But this is set up for print right now, so I'm going to make something with a color that's not going to translate well. Alright, so let's say I had this set up and I wasn't paying attention and it was default print, but I'm doing this for web, and I find that out after I've created my masterpiece, this simple green square. I spent so much time creating this. You can go up here and you can change the document color mode. So that's basically how you set up a document for print. Like I said, you can change settings. I've already changed it to RGB here a second ago. I'm going to change it back. But you want to have this set up from the beginning. You want to have everything set up for what you're going to be doing, print or web, screen, from the beginning. That way you can take everything into consideration, and you're not changing these things last minute. Sometimes when you change the color mode, colors that you were using before that you weren't getting a warning on would give you a warning, and you wouldn't be able to tell since you already created them. I can also go into document setup and change most of the stuff that I entered in, even some new stuff. Also, when I'm creating this new document, it's going to be a tab right here. And with Illustrator, you can have a lot of tabs open. So right now, let's just take a look at the web preset. It's whatever you want it to be. However, it selects 960 pixels because that's the width of a web page, and it's really hard to say also what the width of a web page is, but that's kind of the standard width. People are using wider and bigger monitors all the time. 960 has traditionally kind of been the width of a web page, so it chooses that for you. But obviously you're going to want to pick whatever you want. It's in pixels. Now if I'm working in web, sometimes I still like to use inches. But let's keep it on pixels here. let's say we're going to be designing a Windows icon, and it's going to be one of the big ones. I don't know how big those are in inches, but I know how big they are in pixels. So, also, it would only appear on screen unless you want to print windows and flip through it like a coloring book or a flip book, which is silly. So, these are the only measurements that you would use for a case where you would use pixels. As you can see, the color mode is red, green, blue, because those are the colors that a screen can display. A screen can't really display yellow or orange or magenta or any other color than red, green, and blue. What it does is each little pixel is a combination of a red, a green, and a blue light, and they're all shining at different amounts. If just the red light is shining, that pixel is going to be red. And I say pixels, not technically what it's called when you're talking about a monitor, but for all intents and purposes, let's keep it at that. So these are the colors that can be displayed in the web, essentially, or on a computer screen. They're different than the colors that can be displayed from a printer. For raster effects, we select 72. The reason for that is actually, there's a big myth concerning DPI in the web. 1 pixel on your screen is 1 pixel in the illustration. Really, the reason we would pick 72 DPI is because it shows up clear and it's not too big. It's a pretty small file size, and when it comes to web, it's all about loading pages fast. Same thing with just regular images, anything that comes on a screen. So there you have the basic differences between working with web and working with print settings, and how to set up documents for each of those.